Hello everybody, my name's Alan, as Sam said, welcome. I am joined by an august panel today to discuss the joys of devolution. Councillor Susan Aitken, leader of Glasgow City Region, and also the council itself. Eve Roodhouse, director from Strategy and Policy Local Government Association, and Sarah Windrum from Horiba, MIRA. I'm going to ask just our panel to introduce themselves and just tell you a little bit about themselves and the context of devolution, if that's right. So should we start with you?
Shall I go first? So I've got two hats on, I think, today. So I'm the Deputy Chair of the West Midlands Innovation Board. So obviously we've been driving the Innovation Accelerator pilot programme that we've had over the last 2 years. But also, as you mentioned, my day job is Head of Cluster Development for MIRA Tech Park. So for those of you who don't know MIRA, we started life as the Motor Industry Research Association. So we were a government industry partnership post-Second World War. Our site is just between Nuneaton and Hinckley. It's 1,000 acres, so it's a huge site, and centred with Horiba MIRA in the middle, who are engineering and testing for vehicles. The reason I mention energy is we've moved, although we're primarily mobility focused, with battery electric vehicles, with hydrogen vehicles, we've moved more into some of the energy systems. So that's an area of kind of new technology for us, but where we're seeing our capabilities expand. So yeah, very much a hub of innovation. We've got 40 companies now based there permanently, and obviously we work with the wider Midlands ecosystem, particularly on mobility projects.
My name's Eve Roodhouse. I'm the Director of Strategy and Policy at the Local Government Association. The Local Government Association is the membership body for local authorities across the country, and we exist to strengthen local government so that communities can thrive, and we work really hard to champion and be the voice of local government so that it can secure the powers and the resources to deliver the best possible outcomes for residents and communities. Before I joined the Local Government Association, I worked at Leeds City Council for 6 years, leading on culture and economy. And during that time, I was part of our work to develop our innovation vision for Leeds and the region, and worked as part of the team that went through the Massachusetts Institute of Technology REAP programme on innovation. So I'm able to sort of bring that experience into our work that we're doing around strategy and policy, and particularly how we're supporting devolution.
Susan.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Aitken. I'm the leader of the City of Glasgow, but also the chair of the Glasgow City Region Cabinet, which is a collaborative leadership of 8 local authorities within the Glasgow City Region, which is around a third of Scotland's population in the Glasgow City Region, something like 370 square kilometres of space or something like that, roughly the River Clyde corridor, and the land round about that is the core of the Glasgow City Region. We've obviously had devolution in Scotland on a national level for some 26 years now, and the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government are just a fact of life in Scotland. There is they are connected to Scotland's population and communities in a way that is not ever going to be unconnected now. So we have a different kind of model. In the Glasgow City Region, we came together formally 10 years ago now with the creation of the Glasgow City Region City Deal. But a long time ago, certainly at least 5 years ago, the City Deal became just one deliverable of the City Region. We operate as a de facto metro region, but with that different governance, a collaborative governance, which is from the ground up, from local authorities, if you like. We're, as well as the City Deal, we're delivering the Innovation Accelerator. We're one of the 3 metro regions in the UK that runs the Innovation Accelerator, along with West Midlands and Greater Manchester. We have an investment zone. Those came a bit later to Scotland than the ones in England, but the Glasgow City Region is one of those. A whole number of things now being delivered and planned on a regional level on that collaborative basis within Scotland, within the City Region. And what we are now looking to do collectively is to formalise our metropolitan region status more with both governments, both the Scottish and UK government. And I think it's fair to say that we're now in a position since last July where that feels a lot more possible than it did for the previous years. So we have a very, I think, quite a distinctive pitch for how we want the Glasgow city region to operate as a metro region, but in a context that reflects Scotland's governance and national politics, which is obviously a bit different from other parts of the UK.
Great. So, I mean, the landscape is changing, isn't it? Well, in England particularly, there's a white paper that's coming out, a lot of discussion around devolution. And clearly that will have an impact on the discussion in Scotland as well, and Wales too. Can I ask, you collectively, just the first stage, just to tell me what you think the positives or the opportunities around devolution for local areas to support innovation, particularly. Mm-hmm. Can devolution unlock innovation? In the English white paper, they talk about lots of different things that are potentially coming under that. Would innovation get lost in that broader agenda? So I get a sense, just, if I start with yourself, I mean, working on a supercluster, how would you see devolution making any impact at all? Will it have enough space and bandwidth to look at innovation?
I mean, I think we've got to make sure that it does, haven't we? I mean, I think that's part of the role of, certainly from the West Midlands Innovation Board's perspective. So the board is made up of the 3 LEP geography, so we're kind of building on that collaboration. But also it's got, crucially, private sector representatives, volunteers, as well as the universities and the WMCA executive. So I think we've got to make sure that devolution unlocks innovation. That's part of what we've been learning about through the Innovation Accelerator. And I think, what does that mean in terms of place-based structures? And interesting you referencing the supercluster, because I think that's where we've also, as a combined authority geography, got to look beyond our boundaries in terms of who else we can work with. So if you're looking particularly at mobility, with my day job hat on, you're also talking about Bicester, you're also talking about Silverstone, you're potentially also talking about moving up into the northwest, down into the southwest, northeast. We've got a real opportunity, I think, as the UK to join up some of these key technology areas in the way that they've started to do down in the southwest with climate tech. I think we can absolutely do that with mobility. And obviously, I would like the West Midlands to be at the heart of that.
Yes.
But I think that's about devolution, kind of not drawing administrative boundaries and saying we're not going beyond those, because innovation doesn't work like that. It's about collaborations and opportunities.
No, I totally agree. If I can jump in very quickly before going to the rest of the panel, something that we at the Connected Places Catapult are really interested in is helping combined authorities look at their innovation geographies, as I call it. Innovation is not going to map onto political geographies. Some of it may be bleeding into regions or other cities next door. Some of it, exactly as you said, how do we create superclusters across the UK of international basis, and what are the mechanisms we can allow it to do? One of the dangers, potentially, sometimes people say about devolution is a fragmentation, a devolution of scale and critical mass, which in innovation is really important. So we're going to have to work hard at that.
Yeah, and I think if I can just chime in on that, I mean, it was really interesting hearing the gentleman from London's Greater London Authority saying he needs advanced manufacturing innovation and expertise. I'm like, well, we're here, we've got that.
Yes, but how do we make it happen is the key thing. Theoretically, great. Eve, talk a little bit from a local government point of view. Obviously, devolution can mean lots of different things for different partners in local government. It's not just a straightforward model. And we've seen some places almost embrace devolution and the discussion around. Some of other places it's been a more difficult discussion.
Yeah, so for those of you that haven't had to read every single page of the English devolution white paper or work with your elected members,
all our audience have done that.
Yeah, of course you have. The English devolution white paper isn't just about devolution, it also covers local government reorganisation, which means there are 21 areas in the country where there's currently 2 tiers of local government, and all of those areas have now got to bring forward proposals to change to just having a single tier of local government. So it also includes recommendations about standards and indicates has some indications about wider public sector reform in the English Devolution White Paper. So it all adds up to basically the biggest changes in local government for 50 years, which presents both challenges and opportunities. And I think in the sort of question around does devolution lead to innovation, what's the relationship between them, we need to remember that devolution will be at really different stages across the country for at least a decade, because you have the likes of Greater Manchester and West Midlands, where you've got a lot of maturity, been going for a long time. Places like Sheffield and South Yorkshire, Leeds in West Yorkshire and the North East, who've been going for not as long as those other areas, but have got now about 5 years experience. And then completely new areas, which also are interestingly more rural. So where I live in York and North Yorkshire, you know, we elected a mayor last May, so they're now coming forwards as well. So there'll be huge variance, but it is absolutely an opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity in a couple of ways. One, going back to that point about difference, local leaders really know what their strengths are in their place. So, you know, the work that we did with all our partners over 6 years in Leeds was all about kind of really understanding where our strengths lay, both in the city and the region, and how we could capitalise on them and work together on them. If you look at kind of York and North Yorkshire's kind of growth plan that they've published, they talk about innovation, but they talk about their strengths. So they talk about their strengths around transport infrastructure connected to the rail hub in York. They talk about their strengths around agriculture and net zero. And that's fantastic. Those are the strengths that they can play to and deliver for UK PLC. And that's where I think devolution really can work. Having worked in the system trying to deliver an innovation vision that was bought into by all of our kind of stakeholders in our region, by our universities, by our corporates, by our entrepreneurs, the biggest difficulty was government coming along with an initiative like investment zones and you saying, how do I lever my vision that we know is right for our region to a programme that doesn't meet what we need, but we've got no money anywhere else, so we'll have to lever it in. What devolution does, if done right, under fiscal devolution, it means that local areas can make those decisions for themselves, but we need to have our eyes wide open. Mayors and politicians will still have to make tough decisions about, do I invest in transport infrastructure or how much do I put into innovation? And obviously the balance is potentially thinking about how those things intersect. So if I've got to invest in a mass transit solution, how can I use that supply chain to drive innovation? How can I do those things together? So lots of really great potential, but you are right, and I haven't kind of got an answer to how do you make all of that drive and work really well together for UK PLC?
I mean, it's going to be really hard. I think the interface between the industrial strategy, which will hopefully be a top-down model of where and look how growth should come through in the UK, and potentially looking at sectors that we want to grow, with a bottom-up approach at looking at potential in places, and how do we balance that? There's going to be friction in the system over the next couple of years, and it will require quite sophisticated coordination and dialogue around that, because rightly some places that aren't identified in that strategy will say, actually, we have ambitions. How do we unless we keep reinforcing certain parts of the country or certain areas or certain sectors. So that's going to be a really interesting space alongside devolved powers against a UK industrial strategy. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Suzanne, tell me a little bit about the viewpoint from Scotland in terms of, and the lessons you've learned working in a different system in terms of, particularly I'd really like to say about innovation. Has devolution unlocked that? Clearly, you'll always want to do more. What's your story in terms of how that's gone in north of the border?
So, and I think if we understand devolution as being empowerment and resourcing, and leave aside questions of structure and governance, which by and large, you can make existing models work. It's the money and the powers. I would turn on its head actually and say, can we actually get what we want from innovation without devolution, without it being driven at the local and regional level? So I always say in terms of climate action and delivery on that, it's national governments make pledges and set targets, and local government delivers, and cities particularly deliver. Exactly the same is true for innovation. So in Scotland, the Scottish Government has really embraced innovation very much in the same way that UK government is now, sees it as a crucial tool for national economic growth. But what it has done is create frameworks and strategic direction at the national level. But the actual innovation that has emerged has happened locally. It's happened in the Glasgow city region actually through the city deal, which was empowerment and resourcing. And we used that hefty chunk of change that we got 10 years ago, not only for infrastructure investment, but to use that infrastructure investment in exactly the same way as you're talking about, Eve, to get multiple benefits, co-benefits from every single pound that you spend. So you're not just building a bridge, you're building a bridge to an innovation district which is being established by one of our universities in an area of historically high deprivation. And creating opportunities for the young people coming out of schools in that area. So there's a whole number of things going on there. All of that has been driven. The creation of the 3 innovation districts in the Glasgow city region came from within the Glasgow city region and partnerships that we had created. So we weren't told to do it by government. We got support from government for doing it, and they've been continued to be very, very supportive. They've put some money into it, but it has been driven by partnerships at local level. And the outcomes that we've seen from that has been driven by partnerships at local level. But absolutely, if we want innovation to do more than just drive GVA uplift and drive growth, but actually deliver transformation for people and communities, then local government or regional government has to be at the heart of it, because they know people and places. And if we're driving change for people and places, then there has to be that direct connection between the people and the places and the cutting edge stuff that's happening either in our universities or our science parks or in innovation districts, wherever the innovation is taking place.
So Susan, just give me a sense of that. How long have those districts been in place for now?
So the longest established one, the Glasgow City Innovation District, is 5 years.
And will probably take a bit more time to really see, how embedded they are. Are you getting a sense that are we creating islands in a big ocean, or are we getting that porosity between innovation centres and some of those communities around them?
That's absolutely what is really driving the growth of the innovation districts in Glasgow. Okay. So we started off in the city centre. That is already expanding. That one of the longest established one, which is around the University of Strathclyde in the city centre, already expanding out and taking in some of the communities round about, but also connecting in with the IFSD, with our downtown in Glasgow, where the corporates are, and particularly a lot of leadership in fintech that's actually happening within the corporates, now connecting up with the university and the innovation district. The Glasgow Riverside Innovation District, the next up in development, it's University of Glasgow, around our big teaching hospital, our big university hospital, which is in Govan in the south side, an area of very high deprivation. A really strong connection there between innovation and community, and place making and regeneration.
Because people are seeing the hospital as theirs, and there's an interplace between that.
Yeah, and literally, one of my colleagues who's here, who's part of the Glasgow Riverside Innovation District, one of the leaders in that, we were just having a chat in the break there. She goes to the community councils, local community councils, and talks to community leaders on a very regular basis, because there is a demand locally. They want to see outcomes. They want to see all of this kind of highfalutin talk about innovation, what it means for them, for their kids and their grandkids. And the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, which is a national one for Scotland, but again led by the University of Strathclyde, is further out in the city region, so in one of the other local authorities. And this is one of the things that we're now really focusing on within the Glasgow City region is recognising that things like innovation accelerators, investment zones, very much focused around universities. The universities are all in the city, they're all in Glasgow. So we are kind of like, right, how do the other neighbouring authorities, how do they benefit from this? So we've done a lot of work on intra-regional disparities and inequalities, and are now sort of very intentionally thinking about how we direct an innovation strategy out of a city where innovation is always going to be relatively easy, into the bits where it's really hard, because there are very, very significant
And there's a direct
challenges.
causal link to innovation. Eve?
So I just wanted to sort of build on what you were saying to sort of underline that, you know, in innovation ecosystems, as we know on the panel and I'm sure in the room, government is only one player in those innovation ecosystems, along with your universities, your corporates, your entrepreneurs, and also risk capital. Let's not forget that for cities outside London in
Colleges,
particular.
skills.
Yeah, and FE. And so you know, the power of government is that it tends to be that government can convene those stakeholders in place to build that knowledge. And, you know, kind of reflecting on my own experiences and what you were saying, I think there's a power to build in, not just about how will populations from more disadvantaged areas benefit from the outcome of innovation, but how they can become entrepreneurs themselves. So particularly in the context of health tech, the power of individuals who have lived experience of particular health issues are the best ones to innovate and think about what the solutions can be for them. And so when we are thinking about innovation and the role of government, it's not just about you know, the brilliant work around regeneration and that side of it. It can also be about how are you thinking about your accelerator programs and making sure they're accessible?
Yeah.
How are you encouraging young people and others, and how are you removing the barriers to becoming, you know, to becoming an entrepreneur and supporting people to believe that they can?
And that's a massive culture shift, isn't it? And if we don't get that right, the businesses at the heart of that devolution innovation agenda. I mean, one of the places I've worked, the Northeast, big structural problem there was business density. There were 17,000 less businesses than there should have been to be at the national average. There's 17,000 businesses when you go around the Northeast. It's not, you know, barber shop or tattoo parlour or a bakery. It's those small businesses that are heartblood of that. So where's that coming from? There's a lot of that as a historical legacy around, you know, the decline of large employers don't on to large-scale employers like the NHS but unless you create that business drive, we're not going to create an innovation culture because don't have enough of the businesses.
Yeah.
So you know, Sarah, in terms of, we've talked about places, and you've got a location, an innovation asset, an innovation knowledge hub. That's clearly it's mature, I would say, working with businesses both locally, nationally. What would you be looking for, and your businesses particularly that you work with and you're facilitating to grow, from a devolution settlements, from further devolution? Are you excited by that, or are you worried potentially about this fragmentation of the landscape?
So, you know, with a MIRA Tech Park hat on, a little bit worried, and I think it comes back to what I was saying about, you know, drawing these administrative boundaries. So for those of you who don't know the geography, we are in Warwickshire and Leicestershire, so we span two counties, 3 district boroughs, 3 MPs. We're a big site. But that means we're not in either combined authority. So luckily, I work very closely with the West Midlands Combined Authority based on the 3-LEP geography. But the East Midlands has been more of a challenge because Leicestershire isn't in it and isn't yet mature enough in terms of that local government reorganisation to know what it wants in terms of its structure, let alone what it's doing around innovation. So I think I'm certainly a little bit worried about waiting for that to play out, if I'm honest, and saying, well, actually, what is it that we need to do now? I think the big thing for us, and I spoke about this on a panel earlier, but you know, as you say, we're a mature cluster now. We are recognised as Europe's leading mobility cluster, and as a result, our tenants since 2012 have raised $22 billion in venture capital. So the money is coming to the tenants that are based there, but it's not going anywhere else. And that's what I think we as MIRA Tech Park need to look at, but we also need to work with the local authorities and devolved structures around us to go, right, we're attracting these investors. They realise there's something here that they want to invest in terms of our new entrants, our tenants. How do we make sure that that also understands what else there is in the region?
Sorry, help me to understand that. So what's happening? Those businesses are getting investment.
Yep.
They're growing and then leaving.
Often, yeah. So
Right.
when they turn to commercialisation and manufacturing, yes, they're often going.
Because the ecosystem can't service their need.
Yeah, and they've often got that. I mean, that VC investment hasn't come from the UK.
Yeah.
That's come from
Okay,
abroad.
so they're being.
Let's go to the US. I mean,
Yeah.
that may change, but the incentives that have been typically in place in Europe, in the US, in Asia, the UK is not competing with that. And I agree on the investment zones. I think I didn't like that as a policy because it ends up, again, drawing more kind of red lines. And if you land in this particular area, you get all these incentives. But if you land just down the road,
You don't.
because that's your preference, you don't. It doesn't work like that globally. And I think we need to be more in tune with what the demand is coming from those companies.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible story, what you're telling that, Well, it is, if you work in economic growth, what you want is to see those businesses grow and stay and create, because they see that it's too sticky for them to go elsewhere, that's the point. And that's really worrying, that we're not creating the ecosystems where those businesses that are growing feel they can go, that actually the stickiness that they would be getting in a place isn't enough, and that we got to be doing. That's the sort of the innovation dimension, isn't it?
Definitely, and I mean, I think just to give you an example, so one of our tenants, a company called Cllr, they're an MIT spin out.
Yeah.
So they came to us so that they could build a partnership with NEO. So they've developed all the R&D for the product.
Yeah.
It's being manufactured in China, which I guess you would expect because NEO is a Chinese OEM, but they've taken their whole supply chain to China to do that, so that kind of localized supply chain. I actually think
because it wasn't in place,
because they needed it really close to them.
Yeah.
They didn't want the geopolitical challenges that we have currently. They didn't want to have to ship components around the world. So some of their supply chain were from Europe, some from the US, but they.
So what could devolution have done to address something like that?
I think policies and incentives need to be in place for the types of companies that we want in the UK.
Yeah.
And I think we need to stop.
And that will come from the industrial strategy, you feel?
I hope so.
Do you think the devolution could be more nuanced and allow different approaches in different places around certain niche areas which are of a UK importance but of a regional importance?
Yes, I mean that's what I would hope for, exactly that. So that kind of sense of, these are the national priorities, as you said, but these are the local kind of nuances and the local opportunities within regions. And the region, coming back to what Susan was saying, that the region knows what it's good at. It knows the assets. It knows kind of what the opportunities are. So it's just how we're allowed to kind of strengthen that and fit that within the national picture.
In my career, there are times in regions where we've got it right. If I think about in the northeast, the cluster around offshore renewable in Blythe, you would not believe the transformation that's happened over a 20 year. Sometimes you get it wrong as well. So, if I think about the approach we took around healthcare, it was much harder to develop that cluster in that space. So different sectors will mean different approaches. In terms of local government and their sort of, the pressures under local government right now, really significant in terms of social housing, social care, et cetera, where do you think innovation sits in that? Is there enough space in a fast-moving, difficult agenda? I know, Susan, you'll say it's front and centre, but you're working with lots of different councils. Give me an insight into where the sense is at the moment.
So at the highest level, I'd say that local government has had to be more innovative than national government because of the severe financial pressure that local authorities have been under for several years. And again, just making sure, you're probably well rehearsed, but just as a reminder in the room, local authorities are faced with increasing demand around adult social care, children's social care, special educational needs and disabilities, which is broken. And these demands on local authorities mean that they have less and less money to deliver the services that are services which everyone accesses, whether that's leisure centres, libraries, whether that's, you know, fixing potholes, all those things. So that's kind of very simply put what the tensions are in local government. But what we see from leaders is a desire to want to innovate even in the face of those challenges. So we've recently just done a whole load of work to highlight the way in which local authorities are adopting artificial intelligence in some of their services. So to give you quick examples of that, like in Dorset, the council is working across the whole of the integrated care sector area to put acoustic monitoring into every care home, to use that to sort of improve the way that they're delivering care for those individuals, reducing the interruptions they need to make to check on those individuals. In North Yorkshire, they've done some really fantastic work with AI using Microsoft Azure on their children's services work, where now they can create a networked map of a child's system to be able to sort of do really effective safeguarding in a really incredible way. And it means that they can also look at historic data when a staff member leaves. So I don't want you to get the impression that local government isn't innovative. It really is innovative. That's not to say there aren't councils that don't want to be at that cutting edge, but they would rather kind of adopt and follow. So that's the first thing to say. Second thing to say is that, last week I had the pleasure of sitting in a room at the District Councils Network with chief execs and leaders that are leading district councils that won't exist in a few years' time. And I was so impressed with the discussion where they were reflecting on, the personal leadership journey of knowing you're not going to have a job in 3 years' time, but trying to avoid a situation where you're just making this about structure and instead you're thinking about this as an innovation opportunity for when you create this new council. How is it going to be different? How will it work? How can we deliver those factors? So there is real desire from leaders to want to think about that.
So can I push you a little bit more, Eve? So I totally agree. Local government, the necessity of what's been going on has forced innovation. What about their ability to create the conditions for innovation in their place?
Yeah.
How do you feel they are at that moment? And Susan, I wouldn't mind your take on that as well. I mean, you're just about to invest quite a lot of money on the net zero neighbourhood activity and all that. So clearly, you are investing in capacity, but that's a challenge I know for a lot.
So I think that varies because we need to acknowledge the differences that exist in local authorities and councils. So core cities, like Glasgow and Leeds and Birmingham and Manchester, they have more assets around them to be able to create those innovations, both larger councils with more staff in them, so even though it's shrunk, able to keep good staff that can do this work, and more innovation assets to hand, whether that's in Leeds, there's 6 universities, right? There's all that assets you can tap into. There's, basically the HQ of the NHS. So you've got assets that you can lean into and create those conditions for innovation. If you're in Cornwall, facilitating the conditions for innovation are very different, but they're equally very good at it. They work with the Eden project in their place around net zero and so on. So I think there is variance, but a lot of councils are very good at convening and creating those relationships.
Susan, take your take on that.
So I don't think we need to be scared of asymmetry when it comes to creation and delivery around innovation. I think the thing that we need to be very wary of and guard against is asymmetry of outcome, and the innovation just stays within its lane, and that is where that wider collaboration across different layers of local government, or in Scotland we only have one layer of local government, different sizes of local government and different strengths of local government. Yes, Glasgow is in many ways first among equals. We are a local authority like any other local authority in Scotland, but there is no doubt, exactly as Eve's described, we have more assets, we have more leverage, we have more capacity than many others. We also have greater challenges and they're more acute in many cases than many others. But we have the ability to innovate both as a service provider and as a driver of economic growth than many other local authorities. But by working in collaboration in the way that we do in the Glasgow City region, for example, we can try and ensure that our strategic approach means that the outcomes and benefits, whether they're economic or social or financial or job creation of those that innovation activity isn't just restricted to within the Glasgow City Council boundary. We operate as a classic metropolitan region in many ways, and that we are a very contained travel to work area. The vast majority of the working population within the Glasgow City region work within the Glasgow City region. And so there are real opportunities there to make sure that the jobs that we're creating, it's about accessibility, it's about pathways and skills creation. If that's happening on a regional basis, in some ways it almost doesn't matter where the activity is taking place. If people from right across and indeed beyond the city region are able to access that, are able to know that it's something that is open for them and it creates opportunities for them and their place, then that's how we can make it work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Look, before I continue with questions, are there any questions from the audience or from Slido? He said, looking at a list of no questions.
Because they've been so engaged.
Yeah, hi. Sam, my glamorous assistant, have you got the microphone? No. This Sam has, okay. And even more glamorous Sam has got it.
Two Sams today,
Yeah,
very
brilliant.
lucky.
Can you say who you are as well?
Andrew Ross from Global Garden. It's a question for you, Eve, if I may. Are you preparing a way for the local government pension scheme pool members to see an investable proposition for 5% of their assets under management, which is 345 billion, which Rachel Reeves requires them to be investing regionally? Have you got a proposition?
So again, probably useful for people that don't know the ins and outs of the LGA, that we actually lead on a sort of convening pensions, and we provide the secretariat for the local government pension scheme in the LGA. So in part it's a matter for the board of the pension scheme rather than the LGA itself, because they support those pools. But certainly very much like the work that we're doing on behalf and with that board is engaging exactly with the positions on it. But it becomes about the leadership of those pension schemes. As you know, I don't know your background, so I don't know how much you're involved with local government pension schemes or technically. But the short answer is, yes, of course, we're responding to what the challenge is in the pension schemes. The longer answer is that there is work to be done to make sure the conditions are right and the confidence is right, because we always have to act responsibly and invest in investment.
They're looking for an investable proposition. They're looking for an investable proposition that meets Financial Conduct Authority regulations, rules, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
At scale. So you're starting around 250 to $500 million with a creditworthy issuer, which would be either a sovereign bond for Scotland, Susan, or a regional bond for the Greater London Authority, or the Oxford to Cambridge Arc, or any other the combination of regions. But at the scale that the investors must see in order for them to overcome the transaction costs.
I think you're right, and that's challenging, isn't it? Because you've got to get to that point before the confidence of investment.
Susan, any thought? Because I know you've been engaged with the local the pension fund. Is that completely different? Your model?
So yeah, certainly what Rachel Reeves
and
is
not
talking
at the
about.
same scale.
Yeah, well, no, the Strathclyde.
Right.
Strathclyde Pension Fund is massive. It is absolutely massive. It is one of the biggest in Europe. So it's on an enormous scale.
Well, I was more saying not the scale of the pension fund, which clearly is. It was more around the programme that you accessing from them?
Yeah. So
he was talking sort of billions. You were talking millions.
No, well, no, not necessarily. So I mean, I think that the work that we've done on our what we call our green print for investment. So essentially the interventions required to get us to net zero for Glasgow, for the Glasgow City region, we're talking about 40 billion actually.
Oh, okay. Right.
So
Sorry.
the retrofit, housing retrofit on its own is 10 or 11 billion in that kind of region.
Okay.
To do our heat networks for Glasgow city centre, you're talking about probably about $1 billion. So we're serious chunks of scale of.
And the pension fund playing a key role in unlocking that, you feel?
I think there is enormous opportunity to do that. I think the pension fund, like many others, remains small c conservative. As it happens, my deputy leader is also what we call the city treasurer for Glasgow, the finance lead. He also chairs the pension fund. Obviously, he has his fiduciary duty there, but he's very keen to make sure that the pension fund invests a lot more in these opportunities locally and regionally. It's probably investing in like hydro dams in Chile and stuff like that. It could be investing in retrofitting pre-1919 tenements in Glasgow.
Yeah, great. We're having a really wide conversation here. My friend at the back, that's okay. I'm going to go to my friend at the back, and then I feel like I'm question time. Let's just...
Thank you for the great presentations. One of the elements of
Say who you are.
Thomas O'Brien. I'm the Vice Chair of the Liverpool City Region Innovation Zone Programme. That covers a Freeport and an investment zone. And one of the drivers of innovation is spending on research and development. And there's something I wanted to mention, which I hope is on your agenda. So guess what? The spending on research and development from the private sector is not equal across the UK. Not a surprise. But our public spending, central government spending on research and development, is also geographically very unequal. 3 miles from here, there's a building in King's Cross which gets more public sector research and development spending on one building than the entire northwest of the UK. So one of the things that I'd like to put on your list, if it's not already on there, is I do think as part of driving growth, which is equitable, not just within neighbourhoods within the Glasgow City region, but across the UK, we need to try and use our public sector research and development spending more purposefully and use it in a more directed way to the places in the UK which are currently economically disadvantaged.
We could call it levelling up.
So this is where it's handy that I have read every single page of the English Devolution White Paper, because it actually indicates in the Devolution White Paper that one of the... So the government has described it as a sort of foundation, a starting point, and that there'll be more devolution beyond this, and given an indication that it wants to look at devolving some of the R&D spend and how that is done. It's not been an area we've had loads of discussion with government about yet, I'll be honest, and maybe the mayors may have done, but it is there as a hook, and so there is an opportunity for us to speak more with government about what we want collectively.
Sarah.
Yeah, so just putting my Deputy Chair of West Midlands Innovation Board hat on, I mean, that is exactly, we were in a similar position when we were first pushing for the Innovation Accelerator, what became the Innovation Accelerator programme. I mean, we were pushing for, single settlement, innovation funding within the single settlement, because what we saw was huge amounts of private R&D in the West Midlands and private spend in R&D, and as you say, nowhere near the levels of public R&D that London and the South East were receiving. So the idea behind the Innovation Accelerator in the 3 pilot regions is that forms learning, that forms a basis from which we can then share that across the UK, but also ultimately do exactly what you said and have some kind of devolved settlement for R&D funding. Because I think, I completely agree with you, I think that's so important.
Look, I've only got 1.12 seconds left of the meeting, I'm afraid. So I'm unfortunately going to have to wrap it up because we're just getting going, because I fancied a real argument around the challenges we're going to... There's going to be friction in this space between an industrial strategy. We'll look at UK PLC and UK asset bases with a demand, a potential from places elsewhere, and it's not going to be easy. And I think we at the Catapult, we really want to get involved in that debate, help inform it, help give much better evidence, both top down and bottom up, to allow a much more sophisticated discussion than we're picking winners from the central or you give us more money from the bottom. Neither is going to get us where we need to be, because we need to be competing at an international level. On that point, can I ask you to thank our panel? Thank you very much for your engagement.